Hi, I'm Isabella Nava, and I did my assignment on the satirical essay A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. So the first slide in my slideshow consists of the characters and the setting in my plot. The main character is Chef Nibbles, which is the town cook of the Gingerbread Village. And there is two additional characters, which are side characters, which are Zola and Lulu. They are just average gingerbread villagers. And then we have two honorable mentions, which are the mayor and the mailman. On the same slide, like I said, I also included the setting of my short story, which takes place in the town square, in which there is a tray involved, which Chef Nibbles is going to unveil his absurd plan. And then the next slide after that is essentially going to be my short story, in which I will give a brief summary. My short story starts off with the description of the famine that is happening in this gingerbread village. There's no crops that can be grown, there's no sugars that can be grown. They are starving, and they are desperate for a solution. And then Chef Nibbles takes it upon himself to present his plan, and he calls everybody. Guys, I have a solution, and everybody's all ears, and he is going to unveil the idea that they should make gingerbread copies of each other and eat them. In my short story, surprisingly, everybody was for it, and he even unveils on a tray the individual copies of everybody that they're planning on eating. And Zola or Lulu, they are going to poke at their twin, they're going to interact with the food that they're going to eat, or the copies of them. After poking at her twin, they're all for the idea. They did not question it. They were surprised, but they didn't question it. They agreed along with the plan. All of the members of the community agreed to participate in this absurd solution in basically eating copies of themselves as gingerbread. The slide after that is going to consist of a short summary of A Modest Proposal, in which I will give a brief summary of the summary that I made. Swift opens his essay by expressing the absurd famine that is happening in Ireland due to poverty, and this poverty is resulting in women begging on the streets with their children. No one is able to financially be stable. They are all in poverty, and they are all suffering from famine. They are starving. After expressing this extremely sad situation, Swift then implies or suggests the idea that they should basically raise children to be eaten. Swift backs this idea up by providing statistics, pricing, recipes, along with many other solutions that would come from this solution, a lot of benefits. However, Swift doesn't actually go through with this plan. He was simply just bringing it up just to scare his audience or his community into actually doing something about the poverty. At the end of Swift's essay, he then comes up with more humane ideas to solve this famine and this poverty in Ireland. The last slide in my slideshow consists of how both these stories correlate or how they connect. And both of these stories, first off, they start off by explaining the poverty or the famine. For example, in Butterbean Village, there is famine going on, and in A Modest Proposal, there is poverty, which induced the famine. However, both stories consisted of famine. They both were starving. Although both stories start from very different reasonings, like I said, they both do contain starving, famine, they're all hungry. Both of these stories also include a problem solver, or someone who is going to propose an idea to fix these problems within their community, which is going to be Chef Nibbles, and it's going to be Jonathan Swift in A Modest Proposal. And although they do both have very different endings, they both share the same ideology, in which Butterbean Village, they do end up eating carbon copies of each other as gingerbread. However, in A Modest Proposal, Swift does end up proposing more humane ideas to solve this famine and poverty issue. However, like I said, both stories do correlate to the fact that they are trying to solve the famine. Something I learned about during this time period would definitely be the very bad poverty and the famine during this time period. Like I said, it was just very sad. It's very devastating that they almost had to, or he had to resort to scaring his audience into actually doing something about the poverty. Also, that also goes into something I learned about the author and I found interesting was his tactic to scare his audience into doing something about the problem. In which, yes, he did provide real solutions to this problem, but at first he almost had to scare his readers and his audience to get them involved and get them interested in what he's talking about. I also chose to do this essay because I knew it was going to be challenging. It's a very gross and it's a very gross topic and very not PG-13 and not kid-friendly, so I knew it was going to be challenging to retell this as a children's tale. However, I already had some ideas. I also incorporated the gingerbread and the Christmas theme into my short story, providing the gingerbread man and all that such. Overall, this project was very challenging. However, I did learn a lot from this about the author and about the society.